So my great-grandfather was a fisherman. I don't know a whole lot about him, really, even though I do remember him. But he had such a thick Newfoundland accent that you could hardly understand a lot of the time what he was saying. Plus, he drank a lot. So that was, extra hard to understand.
We actually call our grandmother Nying, which is the Chinese word for grandmother on the father's side of the family.
I called him Grandpa Foot.
We, in our native language, in Hindi, we call them Dada and Dadi.
My other grandmother would be Maman Bozorg, which is Persian for grandmother.
Mchechu means old woman in Kinyarwanda.
I called her Safta, which is a Hebrew word for grandma.
Everybody called her Mamitita.
We called her Mima and Dede.
Grandma.
Hi, I'm Steph. And I'm Robin. Welcome to Stories from Grandparents,
the podcast where we share stories about and from grandparents.
Well, thanks for coming here.
Thank you.
And actually, you're one of my inspirations for the podcast.
Oh.
I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, I'm flattered.
Yeah, because you're a really good storyteller. And actually, when I started trying to think of an idea for a podcast, it was actually a story you had told about your hometown in Newfoundland.
Okay.
Or where you were born, about the doctors. There's two doctors.
Oh, yeah. There's, and their names were like the reverse of each other.
Yeah.
It was Jim King and King Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Something.
Mm-hmm.
The weird, obviously the weirdest one being King Jim.
Yeah.
Like, whose name is King Jim.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Because originally I wanted to do a podcast about coincidences, and I thought, what a perfect story. Two doctors in one town,
yeah.
King Jim and Jim King.
Small town, too.
Yeah. Yeah, but anyways, you ended up telling some really good stories about your grandparents. And so, yeah, you're our first guest, and so it's really fitting to have you.
I'm the first guest.
Well, in live, in person.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Like other people we've called and stuff, but you're totally like
live
one of the pivotal people that I was like, Chris had a really good story. I have some really good stories. There's like stories from grandparents are a thing. And
I
it's
hope
awesome.
I live up to the hype.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Do you remember any stories in particular?
About your grandparents?
That you thought of?
Well, the one that sticks out in my mind is about your grandfather who was a postal worker.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's best to talk about Newfoundland a little bit before I talk about my grandfather specifically, just because I feel like Newfoundland's almost like a character, when it comes to stories about people who live in Newfoundland.
Yes.
Newfoundland's kind of elicits this weird sort of obsession with place. Everyone who lives in Newfoundland talks about Newfoundland, cooks Newfoundland food, and listens to Newfoundland music, and there's a character, to living there, right?
Yeah.
So it's just going back a couple of generations in Newfoundland also feels like going back further than that because of the isolation of it. My grandfather was a postal worker, probably in the late 60s. Around the mid to late 60s. But he worked in a post office that was like a tiny little, like it's probably maybe, it's kind of like, you picture like a shed in your backyard, that sort of size. It's like a one-car garage type size.
That was his
post office, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, like the whole post office for the town of Twillingate was about that size. And he was the one postmaster. So he managed all the mail and stuff, but he also managed the telegraph machine. So it was like a sort of a Morse code machine that he just, tapped on the table with and received telegraphs and transcribed them and sent telegraphs. So, it's interesting. I always thought it was an interesting job because like in a town of that size, that's your only link, right, to a lot of the world, right? You're in some isolated town in that period where not that many people had TVs. Some people had radios, but a lot of what you got was from telegraph and from mail and stuff like that. So it was an incredibly important job, it feels like, it's kind of different than what most people worked at, because obviously most people were fishermen in a town like that.
Yes.
Most people worked, either fishing or something related to fishing, like fish processing or fish plant worker and stuff like that. I do remember stories about him using bobsled to deliver mail.
A bobsled?
Or a dog sled. Okay. What is a bobsled? Yeah, he didn't use a bobsled. Like he was in the Olympics and he delivered mail from the bobsled. Yeah.
But it was a dog sled.
Yeah, it was a dog sled. Okay, yeah. It'd be better if it was a bobsled, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just throwing mail at the side.
Yeah. No time.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure a Newfoundlander has never been in a bobsled. Pretty sure that's never happened.
You never know.
Maybe. So when Twillingate did not have a causeway and you had to go there by boat only, they had an icebreaker in the winter because the channel wouldn't freeze solid, I don't think. So, some of the time maybe it would freeze solid if it was really cold, but at least there would be like some pretty big ice flows in there. And so they had an icebreaker. And sometimes that icebreaker, if it was really cold and there was a lot of ice, that icebreaker would get stuck, right? So they would be all stuck on the boat trying to cross back to Twillingate. And they did this crossing from Twillingate Island to the mainland, Newfoundland, quite often. Like, I mean, maybe on the weekend, like my mom talks about how they would go on the weekend to get French fries because you couldn't get French fries in Twillingate. That's another example of us being spoiled, like that they would actually go, on a boat across the channel to get a plate of French fries and then go back. And it was like the Friday thing, it was like the thing you look forward to. So anyway, they're coming back on this icebreaker and it gets stuck on the way back. And there's this conversation between my grandmother and between my nan and my pop. And they're saying, my pop's like, well, I've got to go to work. Right. And my nan's like, well, we can't walk over the ice. Right. I mean, obviously you fall through the ice in the ocean. Like that's serious. Right. It's really not good. But he was like, well, I got to go to work. There's no one going to cover me. Right. I'm he's like, you and my mom has two sisters. So like you and the three girls stay on the boat until they get it unstuck or whatever they do. And I'll just go myself. And my nan was like very, I've got other stories about my nan too. Man, I forgot all this stuff. But anyway, my nan was like, no, I'm coming with you. Because my nan was like the type, like she was not, like my nan was a very, I would say headstrong, but she was very like, I don't know, she was like a courageous person, she's a very strong woman. She's like, no, like I'm coming. And so
they're all stuck on the boat.
They're all stuck on the boat.
Though. And he needs to get back to Twillingate Island to get to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he was gonna walk over the ice and told him to stay on the boat while he goes just because he has to work, right? And so she's like, no, I'm bringing the girls and I'm coming with you. So they all walk down or climb down the ladder. Those boats have sort of a ladder on the side that you can climb down, and they cross the ice. And there were like moments where it's, like one, I think his like foot went through at one point. And there were moments where it was pretty touch and go. Like he could have fallen through the ice because he had to get back to work. And so they all did it. They all walked over the ice and found a way back. Because even once you get across the channel, you still have to drive, you still have to, get a nice ways back to the community.
Yeah.
So like, I don't even know how they did that, but I don't know if they walked or what they did, but in any case, they got back. And,
he was that committed to going to work that day.
Yeah.
They risked not only their own lives, but the three girls' lives too.
Exactly. Yeah, they had to. Yeah.
to get to.
Yeah, it's amazing.
To get to the post office.
Yeah, whereas, I mean, man, like if I get like a, stuffy nose, I'm like calling in sick. You know what I mean? It's a different mentality.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, my grandpa was a postal worker, and then his wife, my nan, worked in a one-room school in Change Islands. Change Islands was even smaller than Twillingate, even more isolated, and she used to walk because Newfoundland is like very fishing oriented, and especially those communities. All the communities are around the shore, around the coast. So there's not as much. It's not easy to travel inland, or it wasn't then. Right? Like the road system wasn't that good because everyone got around by boat.
Right.
Everyone's a fisherman. Everyone had a boat, so everyone lived in a bay.
So the infrastructure was focused on water travel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she actually had to walk. She would walk at the beginning of the week, like 8 hours or 10 hours to get to the schoolhouse. And she would stay in that area, like sleep in that area with somebody, some family member, I can't remember who, for the entire week, and then walk back home at the end of the week. Yeah. So that's how
so
she...
hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
But that's before, obviously, she had a family and...
That's before she had a family.
Yeah, when she was a young teacher, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah,
she would walk 8 hours to go to... It sounds like an old wives' tale. Like, it literally sounds like... Yeah.
And all the kids had to bring... One-room school, all the kids had to bring, they called them junks of wood. Junk. It's a Newfoundland word.
I don't know it.
It's pretty much a chunk of wood. It's like a
chunk of wood.
It's a log of wood, but they would call
log?
it a junk. Yeah, it was part of your obligation as a student to bring that to the school in the winter to keep the place warm, right? So everybody contributed some wood. Yeah. But yeah, so he had my pop was a postal worker for a long time. He knew how to do the job better than anybody, of course, because he did it forever. And I mean, he had a great setup. Like the post office was at the end of his driveway. It was actually like this little building at the end of the driveway of his house, the family house that my mom grew up in and her sisters grew up in that they had forever. So he just left the front door of his house and like 30 seconds later he was in his workplace.
And then his wife has to walk 8 hours.
Yeah. Well, before, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true.
It's quite juxtaposed, but yeah.
Yeah, much more convenient.
Yeah, I know.
But so the government brought in, and I don't know exactly the ins and outs of it because I'm kind of getting the story like second or third hand, but the government brought in, or Canada Post brought in, some kind of standardized human resources thing that made it necessary to compete for that position. Oh. And so my grandfather ended up having to compete for the position that he'd occupied for, a million years. And so he competed for it and lost to somebody who was basically better at doing government competitions, right?
Right.
They did a better job at ticking all the boxes and doing an interview and doing a resume and everything else. And then he lost his job. So, and he was actually fairly close to retirement as well.
Oh.
So it's interesting how it's just, I think that's just, it's bureaucracy, right? It's interesting how you can bureaucratically find a way to justify putting somebody in a job, replacing someone in a job that they've done for way long, like for 25 years, obviously.
Mm-hmm. And someone who's such an important community figure, and that his life is built. I mean, the office is at the end of his driveway. Mm-hmm. Did that person have to come and work there? That would be a slap in the face. Really? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did he work after that? Do you know?
I don't know. I mean, actually, I seem to recall that I think he might have worked, maybe even worse, I think he might have worked some kind of auxiliary job in the post office after that. Like, I think he might have had to, in some capacity, answer to the person who had taken his job. He was doing some other sort of, some other lesser job in the post office. But yeah, I'm not sure. But actually, there's a museum in Change Islands now that has some of the telegraphs that he transcribed. Oh. Yeah, it's a little museum. It's actually it's funny, it's such a small town that a lot of this stuff is connected, but it's a museum that's in the fishing stage that my great-grandfather owned.
Whoa.
Yeah. So a fishing stage is it's like a shed built on sticks on the water. Mm-hmm. So it's you see pictures of Newfoundland, they're like brightly colored little sheds, and that's where they clean the fish or they process the fish. So they bring in a bunch of fish in a net, and they have stations where somebody cuts the fish, somebody guts it, somebody salts it, whatever. They just have this processing assembly line in these stages. And so my great-grandfather was a fisherman, and they converted his stage into this museum.
Wow. And that is your mom's grandfather?
That is my mom's mother's dad. Oh. Yeah, so it's all connected out there. But I wish I'd done a better job too of really talking to them to my grandparents about their lives, and getting those stories from them when they were around, kind of
Are
missed out on that stuff.
all of your grandparents are gone?
Yeah. I mean, Newfoundland is a storytelling place. I feel like everyone in Newfoundland is a better storyteller than I am. I'm kind of like, half the time I feel like I'm misrepresenting the Newfoundland stories when I tell anything, from there. Like my dad would tell a way better version of any of this stuff because that, my dad is just like a natural storyteller.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that is really. I don't know. I can't claim to know why that is, but it certainly seems that way. I think about my family. Everyone's good at telling a story.
Yeah, and my boss is from Newfoundland, and she tells the best stories and always has those sayings, just like these little like tidbits to slide into everyday life, and it's kind of nice, But yeah,
I feel like I've had that. I've forgotten a little bit of that. I feel bad about
Yeah,
lived here for like 8 or 10 years now. It's a long time. I like going back there to just get a refresher.
Yeah, well, you were just back, but yeah, maybe next time you go back, be mindful. Of it and see what you pick up.
Yeah.
Well, you still talk to your parents about them, but
it
doesn't really pick up that generational, like there's still that generational gap between grandchildren and grandparents that sometimes just gets displayed when you're talking to them.
Yeah, it's a different time. I mean, plus you're getting the story secondhand a lot of the time, right? So a lot of the time you don't know how much of it is the way that my grandmother would have told it, like I get them through my mom or through my dad or, I mean, yeah. But my dad, I mean, the other thing is your parents tend to tell the same stories over and over again, right?
Yeah.
So
you probably get bored of them.
There are a couple of those that I can remember, like my dad talking about, every Christmas tells a story about the way my grandfather reacted to his brother. Well, my dad's brother was I don't know how to describe it. But he was basically the type of kid that he meant well, but he would basically just fuck a lot of things up all the time.
Okay.
He meant well, but he just didn't take instruction very well.
Okay.
I'll say. And my pop had cut down a Christmas tree, and it was slightly too big for the living room. And so my pop said, Gene, my uncle's name, Gene, you mind just cutting like 6 inches or a foot off the Christmas tree? And Gene's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then Gene, when my pop had came home or whatever to see what Gene had done, Gene had cut the top of the Christmas tree rather than the bottom, right? So it was like no longer a Christmas tree shape. It was like straight up and then nothing. And there was no, you know what I mean? Like the top of the Christmas tree is pretty important. And so
it's not a triangle shape anymore.
Yeah, you don't want that. You want, you want to put the star up there or whatever.
Yeah.
And but he has a lot of stories like that about.
How did your grandfather react?
I don't know. I feel like I probably don't want to know.
Not well.
Not well. Yeah. It's kind of like my dad always, I'm so tired of listening to my parents talk about how they got an orange for Christmas.
All the time.
You know what I mean? It's a classic, like, I got an orange, It
was the only time of year they got them.
Yeah. It's like, okay. But that's pretty crazy when you think about it, though. The idea that an orange would be like a special thing.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, if I came from a time when an orange was that impressive, I'd probably be telling that. I'd probably be talking about that every year too.
I guess, yeah, that's a good point.
Because like it's like now it's, I like an orange, like what do I care about an orange?
Yeah.
Like it's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
but if there's only one time of year when you can get them, and it's obviously a special thing, then you can
was
get
that
them.
Everybody's parents? Like, why? What was with the orange deficiency? Like, why?
I think it was. I think fruit, like imported fruit in general.
Yeah.
I'm basing this off of nothing, but imported fruit in general was probably harder to come by. But oranges, what comes out at Christmas is mandarins and what's the other little ones? Clementines?
Clementine.
And those are the two types of oranges that are from Asia.
Yeah.
And I think. And so maybe that it was a really special thing. But they didn't just talk about one. They talked about everybody getting oranges in their stocking, like more than one.
Right.
So maybe better off than when your father grew up.
But it's not like an orange. I mean, it's like I would expect them. like maybe if it was like a dragon fruit or like a lychee or something crazy.
Yeah, something crazy. But it's so
like,
second nature to us.
It's like
I eat
apple.
oranges at least like once a week.
Yeah. Yeah, we're so spoiled.
Yeah, we are so spoiled.
Your grandma's right.
Yeah, she is right. She's totally right. We're totally
right.
entitled. But yeah, it's true. That's what when my mom talks about Christmas, that's what she talks about is oranges.
Mm-hmm.
Not like iPads and PS4s like today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely wouldn't have. Yeah, that's true. I guess in Newfoundland, I mean, what do you expect in Newfoundland, right? It's not like you can grow an orange. You can barely grow a potato.
Yeah,
right?
Seriously. Yeah. Think about how much flavor an orange has compared to a potato.
Yeah. And now we have processed sugar, so we don't care about that.
Yeah, we don't care anyways.
Yeah. It's nothing compared to like a good chocolate bar.
I suppose, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why chocolate oranges is a thing at Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because
right. Yeah. Maybe that's why it's a thing at Christmas.
Melding the two.
Because I'm always getting the Terry's chocolate orange. My dad's side are from the South Shore. And so there are different accents. There's a whole different thing on the South Shore than the North Shore, right? The North Coast, I should say, really. But I mean, like North Coast, for example, would have been more Protestant and South would have been more Catholic. Yeah. And South was more Irish and North was more British in ancestry, right? So just a different background. Not that those things actually did matter, apparently, like, you know, years ago in Newfoundland. Like my dad talks about certain Catholic members of his family not wanting to go to the wedding because he's marrying a Protestant woman.
Really?
Yeah. I think it must be like the closeness to the Irish roots.
Yes.
You know? But I mean, and it's also probably a rural thing. Like there are probably people in St. John's who would not understand that because St. John's is a different culture than a lot of the smaller places.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But on the South Shore, in the town that my dad is from, there's a lot of fishing still, but the big industry on the South Shore was mining.
What town was that?
St. Lawrence.
St. Lawrence.
Yeah. So St. Lawrence is an interesting town because, well, St. Lawrence had a couple different things that St. Lawrence is kind of known for, I guess, historically, or different historical events that St. Lawrence is kind of part of in Newfoundland history. My uncle or my grandfather has, you know, like a sort of a small role in that, really, in that he worked in the mine. So the mine, basically, St. Lawrence was a pretty hard place to make a go of life.
Yeah.
Right. It's a hard place to make a living.
What did they mine?
They mined something called fluorspar, which is like a weird. All I know is that it's involved somehow in the making of different metals. It's like a metallurgical mineral or something.
Okay.
And so it's an industrial resource.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's worth money, so they mined it. And I mean, before the mine started in St. Lawrence, apparently it was really, really poor. They had a tidal wave, like a tidal wave hit St. Lawrence in the late 1920s and like wiped a lot of stuff out in the town. And so people were kind of like scrabbling for things to do, to make money. And the mine was, like a really welcome development. So they put this mine up in St. Lawrence. And the crazy thing is, I mean, as good a development as it was, if you fast forward, like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years, 20 years, St. Lawrence started to see that there was a problem in that they actually had basically not enough young men. Like, young men were dying in St. Lawrence, and people couldn't figure out what the reason for it was, right? They got to the point where my grandfather had to, like, go to the provincial government with this, like, basically like a tally or sort of a running tally of people that had passed away from this mysterious illness. And, you know, most of them were minors. I think pretty much all of them were minors. And after years of basically lobbying the government and going to the company that set up the mine to say, you know, we have like young men that are dying of this thing, and it was a pretty terrible illness. Apparently, like they had, I think some people call it the black lung. Like, I don't know.
Yes.
Just because, just because people would cough, and it was like a really bad respiratory illness, and people actually died from it. Eventually, he got a settlement from the government, and a bunch of things happened that introduced more safety standards around the mine and stuff. But for a long time, my grandfather was just sort of campaigning for that. And there's still actually like a history of the mine that I don't know if you can get it. I don't think it was published, but you can get it in. I think it's probably in the library in St. John's. There's like a Newfoundland history section in the library where they publish that stuff. And I'm pretty sure one of his sort of documents detailing that illness in that Newfoundland Center, the Newfoundland Archives or something it's called.
And that's something your dad's father took on.
Yeah.
Do you know what year approximately that would have been?
That's a good question. I think that was also, like 50s and 60s for the most part.
Yeah.
The mine opened before that. I think the mine opened earlier than that. But this whole corporate social responsibility campaign and the whole illness becoming like a real problem for the town was later on. Mm-hmm. I think probably 50s and 60s. But different time. Like they didn't have any safety standards for those guys.
Yeah.
Like they didn't have respirators. They were breathing in all this silica, which is dust from the mining operation.
Yeah.
And what it was giving them was something called silicosis, which is just basically that dust like clogging up the things that are responsible for like basically filtering the air in your lungs.
Okay.
The silica would get caught in that, and it caused all kinds of problems apparently.
Okay.
So a lot of people died from silicosis, and I mean, even on top of that, it was like backbreaking labor, even, if you don't think about the respiratory problems. Like people were, in pretty rough shape just because it was their only option to make a living, right? Like my dad did a couple internships in the summer working in the mine, and he said that like basically his back has like never been the same just because of all the hours of like just being like sort of crouched and trying to do work in these really, really tight spaces.
I've seen the mighty ocean slap the rugged shore. I've seen the seagull flying and watched the eagle soar.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sure we'll have you back though. Sounds like you got a vault of stories.
I got a couple. Yeah.
And now you just remembered all your Nan stories. So.
Yeah, I remember my Nan stories, but I did tell a good bit of them there with the like paved roads and stuff.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Thanks a lot. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Stories from Grandparents. If you have any interest in submitting stories, or if you want to participate on the podcast, please send us an email at storiesfromgrandparentspodcast@gmail.com.